All right, everybody. So here I am with the dear Martha Creek, and I'm so happy to see you, Martha.
Thanks,
We've got
Grace.
it's
Mhm.
been, you've really been a bright light in my life and in inquiry, and we've had the most beautiful conversations, and we haven't seen each other in a long time, but I love that we get to speak here now and that you said great yes to come and share a little of your inquiry story and what you're up to.
Well, honey, yeah, when it's something I think, Grace, for any listener here to be aware as you listen that Grace and I will share what inquiries meant to us in one way or the other, and we share it here to encourage you to test it out for yourself, really. And I've known Grace for a few decades, 2 decades, maybe going on 20 years,
Yeah.
and many trips around the mulberry bush and many writing sheets and working sheets and questioning sheets and facilitations, retreats and year-long immersions and all sorts of other things. So it's an honor for me to do it. And for you listeners, I absolutely uplift you to claim your own liberation and claim your own freedom.
Mm.
And if Martha Creek or Grace Bell could liberate you, you'd already be liberated. So uh, we're here to finish us off, and whatever's offered here then is offered with a wholehearted, deliberate intention that you hear something that inspires you, uplifts you, moves you, shifts you, sheds a light on a place or a space of confusion or bewilderment or stuckness or whatever you're experiencing in the human beingness of us. That this inquiry is alive and well and tried and true.
Love it. It's like aho, amen, beautiful. It's like an opening prayer to this work. Really it is. It's what we're, yeah, hopefully there will be something somewhere because of the suffering we hear about, and I remembering my own suffering, believing my thinking, and then where it takes you to begin to be able to inquire. So now you do this beautiful work in the world where you do ministry. And where were you exactly when you were, what were you doing when you found the work? Like, how did you bump into the work? Tell us that.
Well, I bumped into the work through self development or self realization work, and I was aware of it. I, however, though, was in a real mode of hunting and gathering. So I had done all sorts of mystery schools, Hoffman Institute, um, all types of modalities, transcendental meditation, Vipassana meditation. So it went into a tool bag of sorts
Yes,
with me,
yes.
and it was effective.
Mhm.
And I still didn't practice it no more than I was practicing other things that were effective for me.
Mhm.
And then one day, 1997, I was in a Goodwill store with somebody that I didn't want. I don't necessarily like to shop at all, or even go in any kind of store. Not that kind of store, but just any kind of store. But it's very important to her. So when she visits, we have a meal, and straight over there we go. And I became aware of the book in my hand,
Mm.
and I have no. It sounds real woo woo ish or far out or whatever, but I was not shopping. I had not left the front of the store in my mind. And there was a book in my hand when it was time to check out, and it was Loving What Is,
Oh,
4 questions to change your life. So I got it closer to me during that time and still didn't practice it any more than I practiced other modalities.
mm.
And then invited Byron Katie to come to an event and have an event in Louisville, Kentucky in 2002,
Mm.
and she wasn't available. And my immediate response to that, through my mind or through my heart, through grace and providence, the message was clear. You do what you want Byron Katie to do.
Wow, I remember that about
What
that.
you want Byron Katie to do.
Yeah.
So I got the book out, dusted it off, and wrote a curriculum basically in that book, using the principles and practice of the work, and particularly the first few chapters, and started teaching every single week and facilitating,
Yeah.
and and even took a lot of heat from people that were in the program and in the process. We didn't have the same institute and all that back then. We
Yeah.
had our own hotline instead of a helpline, and we did our hours without ever tracking it or certifications or anything like that. And
I remember that.
it was it was mine to do. And I did, although I took heat for calling it a teaching, it was a teaching for me. It's a tool and a technology, and the application of it became very close to me, and I've been at it ever since. And it went from a potential and a tool in the bag to a clear thought that I had one day, Grace, that was, why don't I use what works?
Oh, yes.
The wisdom to use what works. And other things were very effective. And I could have a deep, profound meditation experience and could be triggered before I got to the car.
Yeah. Right. That is wonderful. I love that your experience. I remember now that you're saying it, that I recall you telling me that story and to be able to open up that book and look at it and take it seriously, like not, well, that sounds really great, but I don't know if I could do it, or I don't know what she's talking about or whatever. Just, it's like you just commit and just dove right in. That's
And I've
awesome.
used the book as a textbook. I've bought hundreds of copies, mailed hundreds of copies, donated hundreds of copies, still use it. I've listened to it hundreds of times in various times and in various chunks and pieces. And I still encourage it. And I lead people through a 9-month immersion process every year for 12 years or so now, using the book as a textbook.
That's
And that's the difference to me versus burning through the book and checking it off like it's a tick box exercise,
yeah,
or
yeah,
saying I read the book, or prancing around quoting Byron Katie,
yes, yeah.
versus using the book as a textbook and to really go slow in it, and slower than the mind wants us to go, to get an embodiment of the teaching, of the embodiment of the technique, of the tools, and of the application of it. So, and I heard somebody say about yoga when I just piddled around with yoga years ago, that the first 10 years, you don't even know what yoga is. And in the second 10 years, you clue in to what it is. And in the third decade, yoga does you.
That is
And
awesome.
that's my experience of the
Yeah,
work.
I would say that's a beautiful, that's a, I hadn't really heard it quite like that before. And it sounds familiar, speaking to yoga or the deepest long-term practice of something. And that's beautiful. What would you say was something that you found you ran into, you kind of went, no, like we do with the mind, and you used the work, or you stepped through the work, you followed the simple directions and did it and found a different perspective after? Like, what was one? I know we have many, but you know.
Yeah, many, many, many things, honey. And some of the most profound, that's not up there anymore, but in that profile that used to be on that website, on the work.com website, was many what you're asking and describing, like leaving the school once. So I eventually went to the school, eventually hosted Byron Katie, eventually staffed a dozen or 20 schools, and
I know you were
went
on
on
staff.
went on through the certification programs and things like that, and that's no longer the case.
Yeah,
And one of the things was that exercise about the worst that could happen. What is the worst that could happen?
love that.
And I had some creepiness about doing that, believing in cause, and what I'd misunderstood is the teachings of New Thought, that whatever you hold in mind come to your mind, and whatever you think about and focus on will happen.
Yeah.
And I went through the exercise, went ahead and did it, and all 6 of the things that I had on that list happened. in just the next few months, which included
Oh,
a woman that was very close to me. That's like she's somewhere between a mother-in-law, a stepmother, a grandmother, and not my mother, but a motherly figure,
yeah.
and no kin to me. And one of them was that she would attempt suicide, and she cut both wrists. And then that the church would have a crisis of some sort that I had resigned from, that I'd retired from, and cared so much about its sustainability and ongoing and all that. And the minister that they hired to replace me was killed, died riding a bike. And my dad got a cancer diagnosis that January the 1st. So all of what was on that list that would be the scariest, worst things that could happen, all actually happened.
And isn't that something that you had a fear that if you thought about these happening, that they would happen, and then that's the way it went? I don't know. It's just kind of, really, I mean, and I think that's a great thing to speak to. It's like notice the power of your thoughts and being afraid to think something frightening. You write them down. They do happen. Oh my gosh. So what happened then? What happened
It
next?
wasn't what happened is it wasn't the worst.
Yeah.
So the turnaround is it wasn't the worst that could happen.
Yeah.
So they all did happen. And I had a great deal of presence in all of them. And I don't know what that's about or what would cause that,
Mm,
unless it's the fact that I had already taken a look at that, and
yeah.
the work for me is a deliberate, intentional turning over all the rocks to see what creepy crawlers are under there.
Yeah.
And I don't want to live a life in fear, braced up for that. So I want to keep turning these rocks over to see what's under there.
Mhm.
So what I thought would be the worst that could happen had challenges, certainly consequences, wasn't pleasant, didn't like it, didn't love it.
Mhm.
And it also wasn't the worst. I had a great deal of presence, a great deal of resilience and resolve and innovation and resourcefulness for all of it.
I love that.
So it wasn't true.
Like the discovery in the most simple way. Sometimes people say that have such a trouble, so hard finding who they are without the thought. That question for who would I be without the thought? This is the worst that could happen. Who would I be? Who am I? What is that? And just to be able to see, imagine, use your imagination without a thought, and then find that it's holding you. It's supportive. Peace is available no
Yeah.
matter what's going on.
Yeah. And even if we can land on just, I would be in uncharted territory without a map, but I'd be okay.
Yeah,
I'd have some strange groundedness about it
that is,
and more of a curiosity.
yeah,
Like, what is this experience about? Or
yeah.
what meaning will come from this experience? Or what is this experience here to teach me? So there's a great deal of power and potential in curiosity.
Oh,
So who would I be? At a minimum, I'd be more open, more spacious about it, less under its spell. Today, as I did inquiry, the answer was I'd be aware of and aligned with natural processes.
beautiful.
That includes death,
Mhm.
that includes suicide, that
Yeah,
includes disease and diagnosis.
yeah, yeah.
And it's all included, which has been one of my biggest breakthroughs. And that what I'm most quoted on is it's both and.
Oh,
Both and. It's both and.
I love that phrase.
Mhm.
So,
It's all included here.
we had this one dinner once when we were sitting in a restaurant speaking about cancer, and I love what you shared about your journey, even having that experience of diagnosis. And just before you and I are speaking right now, just before this, was with a group that was doing the work on really the worst case scenario, but to the body, and remembering that I also had a cancer diagnosis. you know, it wound up being so light. It was sort of strange after, like, the process and realizing all the details that were in my mind were comparing to other people's experience of whatever this thing called cancer was. But I remember the adrenaline shooting through my body of just hearing that word, it's cancer, you know. And I remember you sharing your story and us talking about that, that it was like, oh, yeah. And you kind of feel the adrenaline and the whatever the anxiety, or here's the mind, the contents doing what they're doing, showing in these images, and and noticing how okay you are is just amazing. Sort of like, I'm safe, like, oh, wait, I'm here. I mean, something's here. It's okay. It's
Yeah.
totally okay.
That cancer without the microscope or without the cutting or whatever, it's like no awareness of it. So who was I just before I got the microscopic report on this?
Yes. Oh, I love it. I love it.
And in reference to that, honey, I sat so quietly when I call that I had the deepest compassion for the doctor. And it's
Mm.
like they couldn't speak it. She couldn't speak it. And
Oh.
I said, "Is it cancer? If you can say it, there's cancer in the breast. You
Mhm.
can say it." And she said, "Yes." So I felt like I was giving her a gift to speak it for her.
Wow.
And then I related to, what if that was your job, with the fear there is around cancer and the
Mhm.
meaning that we've ascribed to it innocently, but there are old paradigms and
Mhm.
old patterned ways of looking at it, that cancer equals death, cancer equals suffering, cancer,
Oh, totally.
and that's her job. Apparently, day in and day out, she's the one that gets to call people and tell them
Mm.
this, maybe the scariest news some of them would ever get. So I felt like I got to minister to her,
Wow. So
and that felt right. That felt right. That's what I'm going to do.
it's lovely. That's such a both and. You're right there looking from her perspective in a way, just sharing it all, you know,
Yeah.
connected.
As I sat with it quiet, like, it's a problem. Is it true? It's a problem. Is it true? This is
Mhm.
problematic. Is it true?
Mm.
Just not much was sticking. And what I got to eventually was this the biggest trouble that I could locate at that time. I don't know how it would be now. Was, it'll be an inconvenience.
I just love that. Yeah. I'll have
And the mind was bringing in all the proof for where I drove my dad week after week after week and other people to support them, and 5 different doctors and oncology clinics and hooking up to the treatments, and
yeah,
all of that was there. Like, what
yeah.
a disruption to my important life.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And none of that was true either, honey. I didn't have one treatment.
Isn't
I
that
had surgery, a radical mastectomy,
that's right.
and went on with it.
Oh my goodness. Isn't that something? Yeah. A similar experience, you know, isn't it funny that you just get all that in your mind about what you've directly, you know, it just basically is sort of, that's been such a from the very first school I ever went to, sitting with the death of my father from cancer when he was fairly young, and just, he died, is it true? And just realizing, like, I just been holding this incredible tragedy, like this is so traumatic and so terrible. And the heart opening about that, you know, just this father, which happened so long ago. And those were the images that came to my mind, even though I'd had other friends, you know, that had had cancer. But at the time, those are the images that came to mind, and just seeing him just being so sure about his suffering and how long it went on, and all the things to endure, and all the sadness. And it's funny because that then it wasn't there. It was almost it's almost a surprise, you know. It's almost like gets to be funny as soon as you're doing the work, you know, like, wait a minute, is that actually true? And um Almost felt there was this, I have a sister who had breast cancer, and she invited me to do some sort of walk, like walk for cancer survivors. And I'm like, does it count? Am I a cancer survivor? If I just had this little this thing and it was just cut out with surgery, and I mean, does that count? I almost thought like, she's like, Grace, you've had cancer and now you don't have it. So you're a cancer survivor. You can do the thing with me if you want. Um, Kind of funny. Yeah.
Well,
I
it is funny, honey, and the funnier it gets, because it's like, I could walk with her if I've never had a speck of cancer.
Yes.
I'm just the last to know
Yeah.
that, like,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
then they'll say, "Hey, did you have a cancer?" And it's like, "I haven't." It's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, then you're not a survivor." It's like, "Thank you."
Yes.
Like,
Nice.
I'm
Very good
walking with my
point.
sister.
So good. It's an excellent point.
Well, I'm in a practice now, and this work that I'm doing, this class I'm in currently and facilitating is about transitions in our life. And
Ah.
one of the practices from it, which is very similar to what we get to an inquiry, which is to die daily.
Oh.
It's to die daily to something. So what I'm describing here is a way to do that, to die to any kind of notion that I've got to qualify to walk with somebody that I care about,
Yeah, that's
to be
beautiful.
a cancer survivor according to somebody else's definition of that. It's like, I don't.
Right.
And I don't.
Yeah.
And then I can be a cancer survivor and still say no to the walk. Like, you're a poor
Yeah.
excuse for a cancer survivor. It's like,
Yeah.
it's true.
Right. Right. I love that. What a beautiful thing. How did you get inspired to just come to you like this? I love that. Die to something every day. What a
Well, I'm committed to interrupting the patterns.
mm,
So when the work has brought that to me, as I look about what I believe I want, I want this, I want that, I want that. It's like it's most often not true.
mm,
And then there's, even if there's an aspect of me that wants it, the other aspect of me has matured. I've grown myself up through the work to accept that just because I want it doesn't make it so.
mhm,
And that the wanting is the thwarted wanting of a 3-year-old,
mm.
4-year-old, and I'm not that anymore.
Yes.
And to look at shoulds, for example, and as I turn around shoulds now, I simply don't speak the word. So traffic should flow. It's like traffic doesn't flow
Mm.
at times.
Yes.
And the word sometimes has been a saving grace for that, because that was a sticky point.
Uh,
And I saw it in people as they tried to turn around. I should have been raped, or I should have witnessed my son hang himself.
yeah.
And they couldn't, it didn't even make sense. They couldn't say it. And it wasn't kind to me to
Yeah.
even put it out there.
Yeah.
So and then it can turn around. My son shouldn't hang himself. My son hung himself.
That's lovely. It's
My son did hang himself.
yes.
So then the should's out of the way of it. And
Yes.
it's a return, which is what the work is for me, a return to reality,
Yes.
to what actually factually happened versus the resistance to what happened or the interpretation of what happened.
Beautiful. I
So,
love the way you framed that because, of course, because that does arise. Had that people say, "Are you saying that girls should be trafficked and sex trafficked and da da da?" And of course we're not, and of course Byron Katie isn't, and that's a very nice way to that you just mentioned that you put it because that's really the deepest intention in here. It's like it's not about having to endure some kind of hardship. It's just noticing what is and then noticing what carries on, you know?
yes. And what's another alternative, which is where the power really is for me? How else can I relate to this?
Yeah. Yeah.
How else can I relate to it? Which was really a sub question of number 4. I mean, who would I be? It's like, how else could I see this? How could I relate to this differently?
Awesome. Fantastic. I love that. Isn't that just the most wonderful and exciting question? Than anything that's happening that you get so disturbed by. Um, we don't know for sure if it's true that all this disturbance is going to come to light. It's usually things that are in the future or relating to something in the past, like we were just mentioning. So, here we go. It's like, could it be exciting? Could there be something active and interesting and creative and loving about it all?
Well, and to stay curious about it, honey, because the answer may be like that's even insanity to think about, when somebody's hurting or burying a child or in
Yeah,
the depths of their own despair, to even say what positive could come from this or what good could come
yeah,
out of it. It's like to
yeah,
be determined, to
yes,
be determined. But while the wound is gaping and bleeding,
yeah,
I will be using the work to poke in it
yeah,
so that you have time for the process
yeah.
and to shed light in a place where you haven't even known there was a light,
It's
or
beautiful.
we didn't know where to shed the light.
So beautiful. Yeah,
That's the thing about the work though, honey. It's there's no place it can't go with us,
yeah.
and one way or the other. And I also over the years, and this has been maybe 10 years now. I don't even know. I don't have much reference for time, but I don't speak in terms of I look forward to. I
Mm,
speak into I'm willing. I'm willing. And that's plenty. I found that to be plenty. I'm willing for there to be trafficking of children.
yeah, yeah,
I'm willing for the reality of it.
yeah,
And I'm willing for that because my resistance to that and my denial and delusion about that won't serve addressing that.
yeah. Beautiful.
No different than I'm willing for drought
Yeah,
and flood and
yeah,
hurricane and earthquake and diagnosis and disease and
yeah,
not being invited to their party.
yeah.
And
Yes. Yeah,
I
yeah,
have to be willing for it
yeah,
to stay in a different relationship with it.
yeah. How would you find preferences? It's nice. It's like I'm willing and I prefer not. It's okay.
Which is honest, honey.
Yes.
It's like no sane person's going to say they want that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I don't want that.
Yeah.
And I, it's included.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want that.
Yeah.
And it's included.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
And I can't deny that there's an aspect of me that may want that, that I'm not even aware of, that wants what it's here to teach me, or that wants the wisdom that
Yeah.
I could gain from meeting it differently.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it's on the other side of a challenge or a heartbreak or something. Then it's like, well, no to the challenge, no to the heartbreak, yes to the wisdom.
Yeah. That's
And
one lovely thing about doing things from the past that you've been carrying. Like for me, that the death of my father from cancer and realizing I don't like cancer. I hate that he died. It was a terrible tragedy in our family. And just I'm willing to have him die and that I could find what I gained from it. I mean, it was just so old. It wasn't a gaping wound anymore, even though
mhm.
I might have told you that it was at the time.
Well, and without inquiry, honey, you may have been experiencing it
Hmm.
as
Yeah.
that it's new, even though it's not new.
Yes. Excellent. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Very
yeah,
good.
it doesn't know age, honey. It doesn't. Um,
Doesn't have a reference for time
no.
right in the forefront of it. That's awesome. Yeah. So true. Oh, how wonderful. How wonderful. Well, tell us how we can find you and look you up, and I'll put your link underneath this interview and anything else you'd like to
Well,
share.
thank you very much, honey, for your decades of this, Grace, and how you serve and how you apply it and encourage and offer up and inspire. And yeah, anybody can contact me I do a free session for anybody in the world to
Oh,
connect them with the resources or facilitate them or shed a little light in there. And it's marthacreek.com. And the email is there, the phone number's there, the schedule's there, the classes are there, and 90% of them are offered on a donation basis. And there's longer, more in-depth programs that are at a cost depending on what's offered, and retreat centers and things like that. But anybody in the world that, if you are hearing this and you believe that if it's challenged you in some way, good. If it's comforted you in some way, good. And you're welcome to anything I have, the experience that I have, or the application of this for all these years. You're welcome to it. And you contact me through marthacreek.com.
I highly recommend it to everyone. It's just wonderful. Say one more final thing is you'll remember this, Martha, but for everyone listening, is I had Martha facilitate me when I thought my world was over through divorce 15 years ago. And I have no money and I'm losing everything and I'm foreclosing on my house. And it was this wonderful, wonderful session. We said, what's the worst that could happen? And it was like, I'm going to live in my mother's basement and my children will change schools. And the way that went and what came clear to me was that that could be a most beautiful thing to live with my mother. And had a conversation with my mother and felt so much more connected to my mother. Like there was old things with my mother that I didn't even know, like good thing we don't live together anymore kind of a thing. And it was so much fun. And now she will be moving in with me probably in about a year. Like we're kind of formulating how that's going to work, and what she's up to with that. And I just feel like it kind of all started back then, and it's beautiful. I was almost disappointed, like, oh, I don't get to go live with my mother. And life didn't move that way, but it was so sweet. So I still ever grateful for your facilitation in that process.
Well, you're very welcome, honey. And I love that it shifted and took hold in you the way that it did.
Yeah.
And it also speaks to your own openness, honey. And just, I
Yeah.
don't know what Eckhart Tolle would say, when you're down on your knees, why don't you just stay?
Yeah.
And uh, um,
Yeah, it's not bad from down there. It's all rivers flow to the sea because it is lower than
it's
there.
like, where am I going to live? To be determined. Who with? To be determined. And yeah, but it better not be her. Yeah, but it better not. Yeah, but no, not her. Anybody but her. Anybody but her.
Right,
One of
right.
my friends, you may have heard of her. She's a Unity minister, 40, 50 years now, Edwene Gaines.
Yes.
When she got ordained, she said to God, God, I'm your girl. I am your girl. You can send me anywhere in the world you want to send me besides Alabama. Guess where she's been ever since?
Yes.
And she's in love with Alabama and
Oh
what
my goodness.
Alabama meant to her. So the torture of imagination, honey,
Yeah, that is.
when it's not ascribed.
Yeah,
Mhm.
fabulous. Thank you ever so much. It's always the most delightful thing in the world to speak with you. So I
You're
love it.
so welcome, honey. I love you to pieces,
I
honey.
just
And
love you, Martha.
any time in the world, honey, I look forward to our comings together, ever how it could be.
Me too.
Mhm.
All right.
So another dinner whenever this
Yes, I
world
look
opens
forward to
again. Mhm.
that. Oh, lots of love, my dear.
Good night, honey. Love to you, Grace. All blessings, honey.
Bye-bye.
Bye, honey.